In July 2024, the Criterion Collection released Farewell, My Concubine, the 1993 Chinese film about Beijing opera actors caught up in their performances on and off stage as China faced 20th century upheavals. This landmark film offered a story ahead of its time in dealing with gender identities and historical events. Farewell shared the 1993 Palme d'Or for Best Film at the Cannes Film Festival with The Piano. Before Farewell's 4K restoration, however, this movie was my white whale. I could not find this movie in a legitimate and high-quality way. I couldn't find it on streaming. I couldn't find it on DVD. A lot of people believe every movie is available in this current era of streaming. When we embark on the endless scroll for what to watch next, the abundance of choices creates a feeling that any movie lies at our fingertips. In reality, even significant, critically acclaimed, and cult classic films can remain hard to find and access. What's behind this? First, let's acknowledge the reality that a lot of movies simply do not exist anymore. Most movies have master copies, the definitive print of a movie, and it's still mostly print for preservation. Then we have safety copies and, of course, copies that theaters exhibited and screened even at a lesser quality such as 16mm compared to 35mm. Most master copies belong to the studios who own the copyright. Studios take on responsibility to steward, archive, maintain, and upgrade these definitive prints. The National Film Registry of the Library of Congress does select some of these artistically important films and their prints for a collection that aims to preserve America's film heritage. Most of these prints were made of cellulose acetate. However, a lot of master prints were made of highly flammable nitrate film stock. A lot of these prints vanished because of the drastic impact of fire, such as the 1937 Fox Fault Fire. Because many stars worked with a single studio on contract up until the 1960s, a lot of careers connected to studios that experienced vault fires like the 20th Century Fox Fire in 1937 disappeared. Imagine if every Angelina Jolie film disappeared. That's what happened to Valeska Surratt. We have press and print archives extolling how popular she was, but her films, gone, likely forever. We can watch a lot of landmark silent films now largely due to exhibition copies, not master prints that often didn't survive. This includes influential films like horror film Nosferatu, the 1922 film that nearly vanished after a judge ordered the destruction of all copies, and the 1927 landmark science fiction film Metropolis. Both films exist in accessible, restored prints because archivists found other copies kept in private hands, often former exhibitors. Lost films do not exclusively belong to the silent era. Films from other countries end up lost due to circumstances such as not having enough resources for preservation. The Film Foundation, launched by director Martin Scorsese, expanded its preservation focus from older films to international films through the World Cinema Project. The WCP aims to preserve films from less affluent countries. Additionally, people cannot find original film prints for more underground films. Kim's Video discussed in an interview with Letterboxd on YouTube how many of its VHS copies of LGBTQ in New York underground movies remain the only copies of these narrative films. For most people, however, the answer for why can't I find that movie is less about lost films and more about accessibility. These movies are not lost, but missing. For whatever reason, a movie one has seen or remembers is not available on DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming. What gives? Two major reasons: legal issues and restoration cost. Legal issues come from ownership, distribution, and release rights, and often music rights. A lot of films fall in the cracks because a film production or distribution company behind a movie no longer exists, goes bankrupt, or is absorbed by a new company that may or may not be in the film industry. That's what happened to I Shot Andy Warhol, a film by American Psycho director Mary Harron. The film received distribution by companies that went bankrupt or merged with larger conglomerates. Ditto for The Heartbreak Kid, a film by the pioneering director Elaine May. A pharmaceutical company owns the rights to Heartbreak, and despite having their library purchased by Lionsgate, Heartbreak and Sleuth starring Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine, remain in limbo. This was also the case for Dogma, the 1999 film starring Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and directed by Kevin Smith. In 2008, when Blu-ray discs emerged for the general market, Dogma released a Blu-ray print to test the viability of the format. Now, no one can find Dogma on Blu-ray or streaming except for really expensive copies of that 2008 run. Why? Because of the rights. Dogma was funded by Miramax, owned by Disney. Disney didn't want to distribute the film because of its controversial story. Disgraced Miramax leader Harvey Weinstein sold the film to himself, then sold distribution to Lionsgate. But Weinstein still held certain rights instead of Miramax or Lionsgate alongside other film titles. We should note, per director Kevin Smith in October 2024, a new company just bought the rights and plans to tour the film with Smith in 2025. Music rights and song rights also hamper a film's accessibility. A lot of companies negotiated royalties for VHS, DVD, and broadcast, but never streaming. Song rights, specifically the publishing rights of these songs, can make it difficult for films to receive a new release. The other big factor in missing movies is restoration cost. Films have a master print that filmmakers use for copies and restorations. Of course, these prints as physical objects need certain conditions for preservation. Still, they degrade over time. Those of us who grew up in the 1990s grew up seeing the title, "This film has been formatted for your screen." A film is formatted from its print for home video and streaming. This is not something as simple as taking an image, then expanding or shrinking. Filmmakers and those involved in restoration have to adjust images to fully restore them. Criterion, when restoring films for release, often have to clean up artifacts from prints, grit, and color degradation. Filmmakers and studios also have to adjust things like color grading to ensure the original intent and look if upgraded from 35mm print to 1080p or 4K. For instance, The Lord of the Rings initially had a greenish tint on clips from an earlier Blu-ray release that Peter Jackson and his company Wingnut Films resolved for 4K restoration. Of course, all of this costs time and money. The question for a company, will we make money from a restoration? Between the late 1980s and the 2000s, the answer was yes. Formatting a movie meant recouping money from VHS sales and rentals plus broadcast, cable, and premium cable rights, in addition to theatrical re-releases. When DVDs took over VHS as the home video format, the paradigm remained more or less the same, so formatting for DVDs and widescreen worked as HD televisions could show widescreen images. But once streaming took over during and after the Great Recession, physical formats and linear television receded in the marketplace. It became difficult to recoup cost for 4K and HD demands. Companies could make money for big movie restorations, especially as streaming companies wanted 4K. But for other movies, especially ones with rights in limbo, it remains difficult to justify the cost of restoration and proceed with a physical release. I argue this especially becomes the case for foreign films. I find it hard to access films like The Twilight Samurai, a 2002 Yoji Yamada film. Despite receiving a nomination for Best Foreign Language Feature at the 2002 Oscars, and despite an early starring role for Shogun's Hiroyuki Sanada, I cannot find a legitimate and high-quality copy of this film anywhere. The same applies to the early films of Jean Imo, like Raise the Red Lantern and Judo. I cannot find these films despite the status of Imo, the filmmaker of Hero with Jet Li, and the director of the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics opening ceremony. What happened? Distribution for these international titles likely came from smaller specialty companies or labels that no longer exist or have some kind of issue. The rights transferred to another company, and that company has a hard time justifying the restoration or the cost of distribution rights of a specialty title. The good news. A lot of people realized that a lot of movies everyone could see in the 1990s and 2000s disappeared. Missing movies became a project of highlighting movies missing because of these issues with the hope of raising awareness for restoration and distribution. Companies like Film Movement, WCP, Criterion, Kino Lorber, and Vinegar Syndrome worked to restore these films to 2K or 4K and provide a market for theatrical and home video releases. Because of these efforts, I can now watch Farewell My Concubine.